If you've got a commercial problem like our sales have dropped, why is nobody buying this product anymore? The answer will most likely be creative. I'm in the business of brands. I am a creative director. I spent over a decade in the brand licensing and design industry, working for big global brands like Roald Dahl and Mr. Men, Little Miss.
Is that something you've always known that you want to do, or was there a particular moment that drew you into that as a career?
It was a complete accident getting into it. Going back to sort of school time, there was the classic careers advisor moment where you got
Did you do that thing where you sit in front of the computer and ask a load of questions?
Uni didn't really set me up for that much. There was a lot of kind of favoritism vibes. I think you can sort of get sucked into that feeling of disappointment, or it's got a direct influence on what you're going to do once you get kicked out of the education system and you're in the real world. You don't need to be a model student to succeed.
So you came to the end of university, and then what happened next?
I moved straight down to London with enough money for 1 month's rent, and that's it.
When you look at the market, is there any players that stand out that do this really well in terms of licensing?
There's people like Disney that do everything. And then you have brands that I love like the Moomins. They do all the categories, but beautifully well.
I can only imagine the phenomenal amount of work that goes into that attention to detail. You mentioned branding and like creative assets. How important is a brand identity to a brand?
Very important, because
left side and right side, what's the definition of left and right side of the brain?
the right side of the brain is more.
Why is it so crucial for companies today to be creative?
Creative really does solve problems. You're not just selling a product into a shop, you're actually selling the brand and the experience. Does the quality match your brand and what you want your consumers to think of? The timeless principles of marketing, creativity and storytelling just goes back to emotion. Brands are emotional, they make people feel. What's your favourite brand?
What is my favourite brand? Welcome to another episode of the Game Changers podcast. I'm joined today by Steph Griggs. And Steph, can you tell me a bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm Steph. I am a creative director, newly independent creative director. So I've just set up my own studio called Studio Griggs in the last few months. And before that, I was spent over a decade in the brand licensing and design industry. So working for big global brands like Roald Dahl and Mr. Men, Little Miss. What
made you take the leap into launching your own studio?
Yeah, it's interesting because I never really saw myself going independent. And then it was sort of in the last year, a few things happened and it just all kind of went into focus that I want to kind of set up on my own. I'd been at Roald Dahl for 8 years. It was an amazing sort of journey, an amazing time. And it just felt like the next challenge that I could kind of have the flexibility with family life. I've got 2 small children and kind of I'd relocated to Leeds as well. So just having the flexibility with commuting and stuff. But overall, I think just setting myself the challenge of going out on my own and kind of taking what I've learned over the last decade and applying it to my own projects and working with some new brands was why I wanted to go on my own.
And when did you start doing that?
So I left Roald Dahl in the summer. And set it up straight away. So it's been kind of officially, it's only probably been about 2 or 3 months that I've been out on my own. It's not really been a while in the making. It was kind of the decision to go independent all sort of happened this year. And then, and then I just took the plunge.
And is it something that's been like secretly burning in the back of your brain for a while? You're like, one day I'll do this.
You know, I'd love to say yes. But I think what sort of kicked it all off was moving back to Leeds. So I'd been in London for 11 years. I moved back to Leeds. I was commuting down every other week and I was really enjoying it and sort of, on a weekly basis. And then it just got to the stage where I kind of was thinking, it was sort of like, like I said, a moment of clarity where I was like, hang on, this maybe isn't sustainable with the children at this age, and I've been there for 8 years. What's next? And it all came at the same time, really. So that was probably the first half of this year, really.
So was that, you moved back up north this year, was it? Was that
2 years ago? Yeah, a couple of years ago.
And then you were commuting, of course, then.
Commuting, yeah.
Yeah, all the rigmarole that goes with that.
Yeah, we were actually home-based for about 7 or 8 months because of COVID, obviously, and we're kind of just taking our time getting back into the office.
Yeah.
So I was commuting, but it was on a weekly basis, and it was probably for about a year, which I did, like I say, I did love it. But it's just, it's on top of everything else with having 2 small children. Yeah,
no, I can understand that completely. What does being a game changer mean to you in your industry?
I think what it means to me is kind of going against the status quo, particularly in the licensing industry. There is a kind of a well-trodden path. And I think for me, being a game changer is kind of just sort of not going against it, sort of rebelling, but just kind of forging your own path and just going your own way through it, which I think is what I've kind of done myself, and it's worked out well for me. Yeah, in that industry, I would say that that's what it means to me.
And for people that are listening that don't necessarily understand licensing, could you explain what that is and how that all works?
So the word licensing, I always think, is just like the most boring word singularly on its own, because it can mean anything. It could be a driver's license, it could mean alcohol licensing, in this specific term, it means brand licensing. So it's basically taking, let's say, your favorite brand. I don't know what that is. What's your favorite brand?
What is my favorite brand?
Or what was your favorite brand when you were a kid?
William's favorite brand, Hot Wheels.
Hot Wheels. Okay, Hot Wheels.
Yeah.
So it would be taking the Hot Wheels brand, and you would be licensing it to a third party so that William could play with, he could play with the toys, but then he could also have Hot Wheels on a duvet cover or on books or anywhere else that he kind of wants to get a toy or a consumer product. So it's the act of taking that brand, doing all the commercial kind of side of it, and then creating the product in collaboration with a third party. So that would be a licensee. So the brand is the licensor, the third party manufacturer is the licensee, and they work collaboratively along with people like retailers and buyers and to get it out there so that
I can tell you straight away that if that did happen, William would definitely be like, I want the bed cover, I want this, I want that, I want all these things, and they're all going on my Christmas list.
Yeah. And it's kind of more I'd say accessible way of thinking about it is what can a brand do to provide for their fans? So kind of fan merchandise, etc.
So there's a very specific example list that I'm aware of where Mr. Beast licensed his name to a third party who I think ran some sort of food services business where they could deliver these burgers or whatever product at the time it was he was selling. And it's all kind of unraveled, but there's some sort of contract. And I'm sure there's lots of nuances to negotiating those deals to protect the IP and the brand itself.
Absolutely, yeah. That is one of the main kind of cornerstones of an agreement, is that the third party is kind of working on behalf of you as the brand. So there's all sort of approvals, quality assurances that kind of go into making sure that that's an extension of your brand, not a, dodgy.
Yeah. And I'm sure that is probably where a lot of the magic actually happens that protects the brand in the first place.
Yeah. And making sure that the partner that you're partnering with is the right one. So if it is a duvet cover manufacturer, are they the best in class? Is their quality? Does the quality match your brand and what you want your consumers to think of?
When we've done stuff here, it's not the same, but when we pick like merchandise or promotional products or things that we're doing, we're looking for something that mirrors our organisation in terms of, like, is it high class? Is it fancy?
Yeah.
Does it go with what we're trying to achieve? It's not going to fall apart on first use.
Exactly.
I can see why that would be important to brands for sure.
Exactly.
What advice would you give your past self when starting out?
Probably you don't need to be a model student to succeed. I was always an extremely average student. I never really
Nothing wrong with being average.
No.
It's got me this far.
I was very consistent in being average. So all the way through kind of school, college, art college, uni, I was always kind of prioritised being social and kind of more the soft skills side of things. But I think the system is more, it's built to be like, oh, that's not quite an A or a B, so you're probably not going to succeed. All right, bye-bye. And I think you can sort of get sucked into that feeling of disappointment, or it's got a direct influence on what you're going to do once you get kicked out of the education system and you're in the real world. And I think that my sort of real learning sort of started on the job. So I've been kind of working since I was 14 in, you know, all sorts of different jobs. And now sort of looking back, the advice that I'd give is like, that's where the real sort of learning happens from a career point of view, I'd say.
So I've set myself a goal. I was like, right, I want to do a triathlon next year. I want to lose some weight. I want to, the year after, do a 70.3 Ironman. And then probably years after that, I want to do a full Ironman. Amazing. So I've been trying to do some training. The big thing that I've been taking away from the training is like, it's better to train consistently than have like one like massive effort, then like 2 or 3 days rest, or like getting injured. So it's just trying to like low and slow, steady, build that consistency.
Routine as well.
Oh yeah, massively.
Getting into it.
Because it is a big shock, because I'm a night owl. So I like, I've come into this routine where like kids go to bed and then I'm up to like 1 or 2 in the morning. But that will change when I was like, right, I'm going to go do some exercise.
You've been doing morning.
Super early. Yeah, which is good.
Even just getting up and doing that deserves a round of applause.
What would you say is your driving force? What motivates you and gets you up in the morning?
So I'm in the business of brands, and for me, it is the brands that I'm working with. So the ideas start ticking, and I guess it's a combination of the brand that I'm working with, feeling inspired by that, and then kind of generating ideas around the creative problem that I'm solving. And that is kind of at the heart of what I'm doing now with Studio Griggs. And I think especially now that I'm on my own, you know, there's nothing like that to give you a kick, because if I don't bring in the kind of the projects and the work for myself, no one else is going to do it, and, you know, be kicked out on the streets. So that is probably the biggest that is probably the biggest motivator. But I love what I do, so I think those two hand in hand.
What do you do for like ideation and creative thinking? Do you have any like places, things that you go to and do that really help you draw out the best ideas?
I've learned just giving myself quiet space is the most important, and usually that just doesn't involve screens. So I'm very analog. I love just notebook and a pen and kind of getting out and sitting in nature for a bit, or just getting out of the house, getting out of your kind of typical environment. And I find just it's like, you know, when people say that all their best ideas come to them in the shower, or which I'm a shower ideas person as well. But just giving yourself that space and time, I found is the most important. And, you know, I think that's the case with the majority of creatives. They need time and space to do nothing, because that's when your brain sort of really kicks into action. So yeah, that's part of my process. It's
holidays. I go away on holiday and then I get really annoying because I'm messaging people going, I've had an idea for this. I've had an idea for that. So in terms of the world of like creative design and your background, is that something you've always known that you want to do? Or was there a particular moment that drew you into that as a career?
It was a complete accident getting into it, because, I mean, going back to sort of school time, there was the classic careers advisor moment where you got.
Did you do that thing where you sit in front of the computer and ask a load of questions?
Yeah. I had a meeting with a real person, a real careers advisor, and I remember she said, "So, what do you want to do now that it's kind of, you know, getting to leaving school time?" And I was like, I don't know. She's like, "Well, what are you interested in?" And I was actually doing graphic design as a GCSE. I did product design as A level, and so those two kind of definitely piqued my interest, even though I did get a U on the product design written exam, which we'll go past that. I got an A or a B in the making, so that's fine.
That's good.
And so she said, okay, well, if you want to go into that line of work, I'd suggest that you do an art foundation course, which I'd never heard of. But to me, it sounded ideal. It was a kind of, you know, gave me more time to think about what I wanted to do. So I did that. And then that's obviously a kind of, well, I say obviously, I don't know if you know much about art foundation
No, I am not an arty type.
So the Art Foundation course is amazing because it gives you a whole year, but to try lots of different areas of art and design. So you could try graphic design, textiles, 3D, sculpture, fine art, and then you can kind of go into an area which you're most interested in. So I went into the sort of design side of things, and then that led me to want to do it at university. So this point of kind of deciding where I wanted to go to university, I was all going based on socialising and where I could have the most fun.
Absolutely.
Which was Manchester. I didn't really mind what course I did as long as it provided me. It was sort of designy and I was in Manchester. And design and art direction popped up. Didn't really know what it meant, but sounded good. So I went for that and managed to get in. And so it kind of, it was never kind of intentional, but it was always just the path that I'd followed. And actually, now looking back on it, I think the sort of golden thread with all of that is brands and the kind of the emotional storytelling of brands. Because when I got into uni, I was much more interested in the kind of the advertising side of the course. So like taking a brand, bringing it to life. And that's been the sort of common thread through everything that I've done. So it's only really when I look back on that I think, okay, that makes sense.
So you came to the end of university, and then what happened next? That 10 minutes of your careers advice that you got, it's like, you're like, right, I'm ready to go into the world now.
Yeah, well, I'd say uni didn't really set me up for that much. There was no real practical advice. I think also on the course that I did, just going back to being a very average student, there was a lot of kind of favoritism vibes. Like if you weren't one of the first class box ticking students, you didn't get as much airtime, you didn't get much support, you were just kind of left to your own devices. And so I felt coming out that I was ready to go into a career, and I felt like the best, or what I'd kind of been molded towards, was going out and getting a job as a junior graphic designer. So when I left, I moved straight down to London with enough money for 1 month's rent, and that's it. So that kind of, again, the motivation there was that I had to, within sort of 2 weeks of arriving in a mouse-infested flat in Mile End.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah. Had to get a job and get enough money to pay the next month's rent. So that was my initial focus, was get to London, get a job. And I got a bar job kind of straight away. And then I was doing sort of freelance graphic design at the time. And that was kind of the real world sort of learning that you get from having real life sort of clients. And then I ended up working for Top Man in the graphics department for a bit, which again was a really good learning curve, because it was real life sort of tasks. I was getting briefed by buyers and people who needed designs for their garments. So I did a lot of designs for socks and pants and t-shirts. And then I was just applying for loads and loads of junior designer jobs. Coincidentally, 2 jobs came up at the same time that were both in the licensing industry, which I had no idea what the licensing industry was. I'd been speaking to a recruiter who'd said that there was a junior designer role for an apparel licensee. So that was one job that I went for. And then the other one was, I saw a job advertised by Sanrio, who owned the Mr. Men brand. And that was the first kind of moment that I had where I thought, surely, jobs can't exist where you work for a brand like Mr. Men. And so I went for the job. It was a sort of more of a mid-weight design job. And I coincidentally got offered both roles, but the Mr. Men one wasn't for the design role. It was for a brand coordinator role, which was something that I'd no idea what that was. I'd never heard of what a brand coordinator was. But they'd kind of seen something in my work that was more of a commercial angle. And I don't think I was experienced enough to get the midweight design role. And so they'd kind of, they saw something in me that I didn't. And so I kind of was at this crossroads of, do I go down the junior designer role, which is what I'd been molded towards, or do I go down this sort of mysterious brand route, which was for a brand that I knew and loved, but had no idea what a brand coordinator was. It didn't sound like it didn't follow the education route that I'd done. But I went with my gut and I went with the Mr. Men job. And that was my first kind of real job. Awesome. And yeah, I went from there.
That's a great first real job to get.
Yeah. So I was there for about 2.5 years. And I was promoted from brand coordinator to brand manager. And we were a really small team, so we managed everything for the brand from this office in South London, and I ended up kind of under the brand manager role, looking after publishing, looking after brand partnerships, doing a bit of creative ideation as well around what products we should be doing, and then working directly with brands as well. So I was doing a lot of collaborations.
Also wearing many hats then as the sort of the perks of being in a small team, which probably, I suppose, probably set you up for the next role. So what was it that happened next, and what made you look to move on from that position?
I just felt like I was ready for another opportunity and for another challenge. So I wasn't hard looking. I was just kind of keeping an eye out of what was coming up, and that's when I saw the Roald Dahl job, and it was like, love at first sight. So
was that sort of like an eyes lit up moment where this is the thing I want to go for?
Yeah.
I'm all in on trying to get this position.
Yeah. And the role was licensing manager, which again was kind of, I was a brand manager. I had this design background. I was already a little bit of a hybrid. And then the licensing manager role was, as advertised, very commercial. It was doing the negotiating, doing the royalty rate negotiations, kind of the crafting a sort of licensing program, working with third-party licensees, which I'd done, but through a slightly different kind of way of more of the, from the marketing side and the collaboration side. I did a bit of a mental crash course in like how I could get this role and what I would need to sort of adapt to get the role. So I worked with a couple of people that I knew in the industry and just kind of prepared for the interview and kind of learned that way. And then I kind of brought my design skill set with it. So the interview, I kind of said, and I do come with this design package as well. And I think that was kind of what piqued their interest, which was actually, we do not have a designer. So could you do that as well?
Yeah, so actually all those other things that you'd done unbeknownst to you all came into effect when you applied for that role and you were able to tap into all that different knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. And I was quite open and honest in that, what I can bring is all these different areas, but I am going to be doing some sort of learning on the job in terms of the commercial side of it. So
starting at Roald Dahl and taking those sort of childhood classics out into licensing, how does that process start? Like where do you begin? Was there already like an element at play in terms of things that were being licensed, and were you looking to expand upon that commercially? How did it sort of unfold, and how did you bring all that to life in that role?
Well, because of my kind of creative commercial skill set and being the designer as well, it was a really unique position that I could kind of bring in, that I could do the 360 of a product. So I was kind of starting out from the artwork and the assets point of view, so making sure that the artwork and the kind of, let's say, the quotes that we were licensing, so Quentin Blake's illustrations with Roald Dahl's sort of narratives and quotes, making sure that they were saying what we wanted to say on a product, first of all. So starting out with a style guide, and then kind of finding the right partner. And there was an existing licensing program, there was existing partners, but also I really wanted to expand into categories that weren't already existing. So that was part of the role, was sort of bringing it to new areas. Maybe that was through more sort of partnership focus as well, to kind of bridge it into those different categories that there weren't already there. And then kind of going into the product development of it as well. So kind of I loved that part, because it meant that you could kind of, there were stages of approvals that you could get a product and say, this is nice, but actually can we add more embellishments here, or could this be, made better in any way so that it's a better experience for,
sort of using that design eye to,
exactly,
with the commercial mindset, also sprinkling that on,
exactly,
making sure you get the best product at the end.
Yeah, and then working with the retailer as well at the end, which is again the kind of the soft skills, it's the communication point of view, and kind of selling the brand so that you're not just selling a product into a shop, you're actually selling the brand and the experience and what the consumer's going to kind of get out of it.
When you mentioned categories before, is there like a standard list of categories, or what categories did you expand into?
Yeah, it's pretty standard. So apparel, stationery, kind of food and drinkware. Publishing is obviously a kind of more of a standalone strand, but that can sit as a category. Giftware, obviously that can be quite broad. There's toys, of course. And then within each of those categories, you've got a kind of, a full expansion of all the different things that fall into that. Health and beauty is another one, which would be, bubble bath.
Yeah. So when you look at the market, is there any players that stand out that do this really well in terms of licensing?
That's a good question. I mean, there's people like Disney that do everything.
I was thinking Disney. I was thinking Disney Shop, all this other stuff you get promoted. Yeah.
And I think that's an example of a brand where they have almost every category under the sun. And then you have brands that I love, like the Moomins, that also have lots.
They're the blue
white.
One. Oh yeah, the
white
/blue things. Yeah.
And Little My, if you remember.
No, I don't remember Little My. No, I remember the Moomins though.
Mm-hmm. So they do everything. I mean, they're more of a Scandi. They're a Scandi origin brand. So a lot of what their merchandise is kind of, it's global, but a big focus in the Scandi countries. But they do all the categories, but beautifully well, like top tier design, top, high quality products. So for me, kind of aspirationally, I'd say the Moomins do it really well.
I'm going to go and look that up now.
Yeah.
So working at Roald Dahl, and obviously growing up around children's books from Roald Dahl, which I've not had to witness. Well, I've not witnessed yet because William's not old enough. Mm-hmm. But what was your sort of like favourite book growing up from Roald Dahl?
Mine was always George's Marvellous Medicine, which I think everyone has their own kind of book that they just read again and again. And I think for me, George's Marvellous Medicine really sparked my imagination with just the idea of getting loads of household lotions and potions together and creating something that is going to do all of these magical things. And actually it was Quentin Blake's illustrations of Grandma kind of that just cracked me up. And yeah, there's that sort of that dark side, which I think I just really liked to read. There's a kind of, I think with a lot of Roald Dahl's books, there's an element where as you're reading it as a child, you think, I can't believe I'm being allowed to read this. It really it's that kind of dark side of it. Just, I think that's what children they love.
I can't wait for that stage.
Yeah.
My kids. I think because it'll feel a little bit for me like I was sat there then thinking about Roald Dahl books. I couldn't specifically name a specific Roald Dahl book. I'm sure I probably could have, I put my mind to it, but I can't wait to read them again.
Yeah.
When they're old enough to perhaps understand them more.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of the Tiger That Came to Tea and that sort of stuff at the moment, and the Room on the Broom.
Yeah.
And all that sort of, like, is it
Julia Donaldson. Yeah.
That's all super popular at the moment.
Yeah.
Like Zog and the Flying Doctors.
Brands. Yeah.
Really cool. So working in licensing, I'm sure meant working closely with a legal team. Mm-hmm. What are the sort of legal pitfalls that brands should look out for when licensing their products?
I think just firstly being aware of the chain that can happen when you sign a license. So sometimes you'll get a licensee who can do it all themselves. They have their own factory, they have their own, team, whatever that means. So that when you sign that contract, you're signing it with them, but you really need to cover yourself for any kind of licensees that then subcontract out to other factories, globally, to make sure that you're covering yourself with those as well. So there's all sorts of kind of clauses that cover that. I think other things to be aware of legally is just the terms that you're setting out of how that licensee can use your brand. So usually that'll have a kind of duration to it. So say 1 to 3 years. And yeah, I mean, the legal contract is just like the the most important document that you can have, because it lays out everything on it, including the commercial terms, the royalty rate that you're getting, and just how you want to protect your brand as well, and also how you want to market it as well.
So you mentioned the royalties. We've not really talked about commercials. We've talked about the creative aspect.
Yeah.
I suppose a key reason why these organisations do it is for the commercial side of things. So how does licensing work then? So let's say you have there is a product, let's say it is what we talked about before, it's a duvet cover. Mm-hmm. That duvet is, I don't know, £15, let's say, in the shop for the set.
Yeah.
Like how do you set the percentage? Is it like is there a pre-commit on a certain volume? Because obviously the brand's probably making a lot of effort to license this. There's fees behind the scenes, there's time. Mm-hmm. Is there normally like a gated, like there's effectively a buy-in at the start, or is it a fixed percentage on volume of sales?
There tends to be kind of industry standard sort of royalty rates depending on the category, because they do vary by category. And the royalty rate is always negotiated based on the wholesale amount, so not what you pay. It can be, that's something a little bit different, that's a different deal, but usually it's based on what price the licensee sells it to the retailer at. So typically it's between, let's say, 12 and 14%.
Wow, that high.
Yeah.
I didn't think it would be that high, but I suppose it makes sense because it's got to be enough in it for the brand, because effectively it's their IP that's drawing that customer to buy that product.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And, there's different ways of making up that margin as well on the other side. So sometimes you'll find that licensed products can be slightly more expensive, sometimes not, but it's naturally a little bit more of a premium product because the manufacturer is paying to have that brand on it. But just going back to what you were saying about, brands will always want to have a commercial angle to it. Actually, there is something called a contra deal, which is where two brands will do a partnership without any royalties, or kind of the commercial side of it would be brand exposure. So that's just another way of doing it as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I suppose if there's someone that produces toothbrushes and can get them in the hands of kids, and then those kids might want to watch the film or buy the other products that they've got, that sort of thing.
It's usually more consumer brands as well. Like, so say, for example, I don't know, the Spider-Man movie would do maybe a deal with a cereal or a kind of something like that. So it's the dual exposure.
Yeah, like a mutually beneficial relationship. Yeah, that makes sense. So from all your sort of decade of experience that you've got in the variety of different roles and sectors, what would you say from that experience is going to have the biggest influence over your new Studio Griggs?
I think marrying the creative side of my brain and the commercial side of my brain. So I think they truly are sort of 50-50. I feel like the left side and the right side, it's typically they kind of, I think, tend to work more siloed, but for me they're always working together. And I think just bridging those two worlds and kind of having that 360 sort of holistic view of a need on a project and being able to help in all of those areas, I think is what I want to specifically carry forward into Studio Griggs. So
left side and right side, what's the definition of left and right side of the brain?
So the left side is more logical, strategical. Is that a word?
That's a word. We'll go with that. Yeah.
Logical. I think strategic sounds better, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Logical, strategic, more data driven. And the right side of the brain is more kind of creative, open, and kind of, a little bit more wayward, I think.
Oh, okay. I got asked to do 4 personality tests recently.
Oh,
different colours. I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. There's lots of different tests like that.
I wonder whether if I read them all and I put myself in a category, whether if I did the test, I'd then be in that category. That'd be interesting to see.
Yeah.
I told them a blue, whatever that means. But then I asked other people and they said, I don't think you're a blue. I think you're a blue and a something else. So we'll see. I'm not sure what it's called, that one.
I haven't done that one, actually. I need to do it.
But there's the 16 personalities test as well that people do.
Yes.
That's a very popular one.
Yeah.
But it's that, you were saying, it's that marrying of the two that really is what gives you that edge in terms of launching your own studio. Yeah,
and I guess as well, just being really agile in that way, so that it is me, but I can build a team behind the scenes as needed, or I can kind of work on my own to kind of be a bolt-on to a team. But when I'm kind of being that bolt-on, although I'm an independent creative director, I carry this experience from being a licensing and design director, from being a designer, from being a brand manager. And so it's almost like a kind of 4-in-1.
You're tapping into that sort of a triple threat of expertise that, that you might have to go out and hire 3 people to actually go and do.
Exactly.
But actually you can bring you in as a consultant and to deliver that for the client.
Yeah.
So creativity is obviously super important in your role and in a sort of a more general business context. But why is it so crucial for companies today to be creative?
So just going back to kind of creative and commercial and how they're kind of, in my world, they're very much married together. I feel like the commercial gives the why and the creative sort of gives a how. And I think it's that sort of cycle that's, also it really interests me in terms of like creative problem solving, and creative really does solve problems, and so kind of thinking of it as a communication method, and rather than it being a broad sort of word of just creativity, it's solution driven and it's communications driven. So if you've got a commercial problem like our sales have dropped, why is nobody buying this product anymore? The answer will most likely be creative. And so it's just looking into what that is and how you can expand on that.
How should creative be balanced against like budgets and timeline? Like, should you chase the sort of like the best possible outcome? How do you balance all that together?
I think it should be quantifiable against budgets. I think you can see a return on investment with creative, and I think you should be able to. And I think a part of what I do as well is kind of make sure that what you have in, speaking from a brand's point of view, that what you have by way of assets and artwork and kind of brand assets in general, that it's working as hard as possible. So kind of running a creative order and making sure that if there's any gaps, that it's really kind of worth it to invest more in that side of it, so that then you can offset that against budgets. And it should be quantifiable, definitely.
You mentioned branding and like creative assets. How important is a brand identity to a brand?
Very important, because how your brand sort of shows up in the real world and shows up to your consumer says everything about who you are. So again, it's a kind of communication method. It's a way of kind of reposition it. How do you want your consumer or your audience to feel? And that's what your brand identity should portray. So if you want them to feel entertained, or maybe you're targeting like a specific age group and you want that age group to feel entertained, then you want your brand identity to kind of get that across. And then there's parts of that, such as the tone of voice, so that the things that you're saying sit with that as well. But again, it just all kind of goes back to that the emotional side of it. Brands are emotional. They make people feel things. So your identity should say that. And
how do you think that translates into B2B? Like for an organisation like us, how can we bring that emotion into our communication and our identity to our clients?
I think it's no different whether it's B2B or B2C, because your audience, even though it's kind of other businesses, that's your audience. So if you want them to feel safe, or that they or you want to kind of give a little bit more of a playful USP, then that's what your identity should say as well.
So you're on the advisory board of House of Lords.
Oh yeah, Lord Whitney.
Okay, Lord Whitney.
It's a bit confusing because it's called the House of Lords is the advisory board.
Okay, so it's called house as in German house.
Yeah, it's
house?
just a play on words because of the Lord side. So it's like,
so what does,
really it's just an advisory board.
Okay,
yeah, so if that's easier.
Okay, so you're on this advisory board. Can you explain what that is and why having a female-run board is important in this industry?
Yeah, so I was kind of I'd been aware of Lord Whitney's work for quite a few years. They're an amazing sort of artist-led studio in Leeds that do immersive experiences. Their kind of tagline is playgrounds, not plays. So it's meant to be kind of interacted with. They've done some amazing work kind of nationwide, but being Leeds-based, they've always really kind of spoken to me. And I saw that they were advertising for a new advisory board. And it kind of coincided around the time that I'd moved back to Leeds as well. And so I met with them, and it's been a kind of amazing 2-year journey just to kind of get to know their business, and kind of where I've been advising is more from my background. So a lot of kind of IP related things, kind of how they can operate with the licensing industry more, because it's such a kind of rich industry for immersive studios. So that's kind of what I've been doing with them. But back to your question about why it's important to have female-led board, I think, well, just an advisory board kind of musters up quite a sort of fusty image of like men with briefcases.
Pinstripe suits.
Yeah, and it's not that at all, you know. It's and a few of us on the board are mothers, including both Amy and Beck, who run Lord Whitney. And it's just so important to have kind of female leaders and kind of female voices. And I think with, you know, the advisory board aside, what Beck and Amy are doing with Lord Whitney is really inspirational. So having female advisors as well, I think was really important to them.
So you mentioned the immersive experiences. Mm-hmm. Is it something that's more like retail focused? Is it retail brands want to do something that's innovative and is like chance for consumers to get closer to their brand and product? What kind of some examples of the work they've done? Because I'm not familiar with them.
Yeah, so that is something that they can do. And actually we worked together on a project just before I left Roald Dahl, actually, which was reimagining the space of the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory afternoon tea at One Aldwych Hotel in London. And we brought them in to kind of bring that to life through their art direction and through their kind of the physical space elements of it. So that included like a neon sweet bar and a kind of an amazing sort of pipe factory led photo opportunity, and kind of it's immersive, but it's also bridging that gap between design and actually physical kind of experiences. And so they can do things like that, but then also they did an incredible partnership with Harewood House in Leeds, which is a kind of, I mean, it's a sort of stately home, which it's got quite a contemporary team behind it. So they do a lot of exhibitions, and they commissioned them to do a Christmas immersive experience where you went into the house and you were kind of experiencing Christmas. So, but through the eyes of a child, really. So it's
cool.
Yeah. So it's always really playful spaces and kind of just capturing the emotion of Christmas and kind of making it immersive.
I can only imagine the phenomenal amount of work that goes into that attention to detail.
Absolutely.
So I imagine it's probably in that sort of scenario, I bet there's a lot of very small touches that really bring it to life.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm sure it doesn't compare. Like we tried to do some stuff here and it's that producing things and we're like, wow, this is so much effort to like just get one thing made, like whether it's clothing or something else, because we have like we have a good level of attention to detail and we want the same thing to go out to our clients. And so imagine doing that on a scale where you've got tens or hundreds of things that you've got to pull together.
Absolutely.
And then,
so many moving parts.
Yeah, definitely. So starting your own studio, super challenging. What inspired you to start Studio Griggs?
Just having the freedom to kind of do things how I want to do it, and kind of having the confidence to do that based on what I've learned over the last sort of decade plus, and kind of, I guess, narrowing down what I've enjoyed and what I haven't enjoyed over that time, and kind of what I can bring forward and what I can share with new clients, with brands that I want to work with, and have a bit of diversity with the brands that I work with as well.
So what sort of brands do you look to work with? What's like your ideal client at your studio? I
think just brands that I have a kind of emotional connection with, and brands that have a creative challenge that needs solving. Because that's what inspires me, that really motivates me. And I kind of, rather than it being a specific type of brand, I think it's a brand that has that creative problem. And that kind of means that it's quite sort of naturally varied with what I can offer as well.
So obviously you mentioned, and you've previously worked at children's brands. Mm-hmm. Is there any sort of like ideal children's brand client that you'd love to work with? And is that something that you still intend on focusing on with your new studio?
Yeah, absolutely. I love working with children's brands. I think, also having 2 children that are kind of, 2 and 4, I'm seeing it every day through their eyes. And that just naturally gives me sort of ideas, and kind of, I can see sort of holistically what what I would do differently or what I feel like's missing or kind of who I would want to work with. There's so many that I would have on my list. And yeah, it's getting longer. The list is getting longer.
And do you think is it getting longer because there's lots of children's brand out there to inspire you? Is it because you're like bumping into them at home and thinking, oh, they're doing a really great job, that's super interesting?
Yeah, I think both. The brands that I'm being exposed to organically, I'm seeing more of. And I think there's some really exciting sort of preschool and kids brands that are out there at the moment. And yeah, so I think a combination of both.
So whenever I go to buy books, I'm always like, oh, this cool series of books.
Yeah.
And there seems to be a lot of crossover at the moment from like, call them celebrities, that sort of like get into like releasing books.
Yeah.
And I skimmed through some of them, like I'm never quite sure, like is it the guy that was in Busted or something? He started writing, I think like, maybe Greg James has got a book out, a kid's book.
Yeah,
there's all sorts of like, do you think a lot of that is in an element licensing, or do you think they are turning their creative hand to producing something?
I think it's turning a creative hand. I think, creativity spans all sorts of different mediums and touch points. And I think that, if you think of something like songwriting, that can very easily be pivoted into book writing. And I think that writing for children is really attractive because you can kind of let that inner child out when you're writing and you can be really playful with it. I think it's a case of sort of creative pivoting.
That makes sense, because I can see how that, with some of those characters I mentioned, how perhaps that inner child being let out is that writing is sort of their release for that.
Yeah. So
how do you find and adapt your work-life balance now that you've got your own studio? And has that helped, find a balance with having a young family?
It's just been so amazing. I mean, we'll say that Roald Dahl are amazing at being kind of flexible, and that was never a problem. But I think now that I can be, truly flexible in the way that I work, if I need to pick my son up from school and kind of have those few hours with him and then just work the evening, or kind of, if there's something that I want to go out and be inspired by, whether that's kind of, an exhibition or just going somewhere that I know is going to let me sort of ideate and kind of build into my creative process when I'm thinking about something, I can do that. It's kind of, each week is very different depending on how I need to carve it up. If I'm working on something that needs a lot of my time that week, I can also be really flexible, with my partner, which I'm really fortunate to have him sort of support those kind of longer working days as well. So just overall, it's just so nice to have that kind of, that flexibility and be there for, one of the big considerations with going independent as well was my son starting school in September. So, finishing at 3:30, aka the middle of the day.
Yeah, that is something I'm looking forward to for him, but not looking forward to for me.
Yeah, it is a big shift.
Yeah, that'll be hard to get used to.
Yeah,
because
it is.
You're almost setting your day up to play to your strengths almost. So it's got great perks around having, a better family and work-life balance, because you can pick your kids up, things get a little easier. If they've got something on you want to take them to, you can go and do that. But then if you get like that sudden burst at the night and you're right, I'm going to sit down and work on XYZ projects, you've got the freedom to go and do that and not feel necessarily like guilty for that, because actually it's when you are effective.
Yeah. And also, just not feeling guilty about using things like after school club and, getting help. Yeah. Getting childcare help.
And it's easy to feel guilty. I think, I should be looking after them, but you just can't. It's just not possible to maintain a balance with everything else. And
exactly.
Yeah, we have that, should we put him in preschool, this thing? Should put him in for this, do that? And I said to my wife, because she's looking for the baby, I thought, because one of the schools, they only do half days. And I think that having full days would be easy, because I made a joke yesterday because we had some stuff that we had to sort out, and we literally drove to one place, got out the car, hit a load of traffic, drove back, and I think 2 or 3 hours had gone.
Yeah, and then you had to go and pick them up.
And I said to joke, if they were on half days, you'd literally drive out, do this thing, go pick them up. And you've not really had a break because the baby's fallen asleep in the car.
Yeah.
And
which is how school feels as well. So when it is actually a half day, then
because
what you would actually get done, I can imagine, is
9 till 3 is because is it 9, 8?
9 till 3:30.
Yeah, that's not long.
It's not long.
I'd definitely be using the after school clubs.
Yeah.
So what does a typical day look like? But I guess there's no real typical day when it's your own business.
No, there isn't. As I say, I'm not massively long into it. So it's each week since I've gone independent has been so varied. And I think they've all been very kind of set around the requirements of the kids. So like we've just come out of half term, so that was a little bit of a write-off.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah.
And then I'm working on a kind of proposal at the moment. So this week is kind of much more, work heavy, after school club, see you later.
Yeah.
And it might be event driven. So I'm going to London in a couple of weeks to go to a sort of brand storytelling workshop. So I like the flexibility and I like each week being totally different. So yeah, it's been very varied.
And what are you doing as a studio that sets you apart from other people that are out there in the market? I know you've mentioned obviously that wide sort of like left brain, right brain, that wide expertise that you're drawing together, that sort of commercial and creative aspect. And how does all that flow into what sets you apart as a business?
Just being able to kind of pivot has always been something that I've really taken to. I know we spoke about that earlier and how I kind of think that the golden thread of that is sort of the emotional side of brand storytelling. And I think that is what really drives me with Studio Griggs. And I think having the ability to pivot between projects. So if the project comes in that's more commercially focused, but might have a creative side to it, that's fine. If it project comes and it's just pure creative because the commercial or the strategy has kind of all been done, then that's also fine. So it just means that the diversity of projects that I can take on, along with kind of being able to build a team behind the scenes if needed, then it just means that I can be really versatile as a setup and as a studio.
I guess it's that flexibility, isn't it? That, working with that small independent that it can grow the organization if required to work with clients. That's just that. You're just not going to get that out of a big entity. You're probably not even a big number unless you're an enormous brand. You're just not going to get that attention that you need to help propel your business forwards.
Yeah. And also I think just being very lean and agile. I think, the bigger that you get as a company, obviously the overheads grow. Yeah. You have to naturally charge more to keep the lights on and to kind of charge out. Whereas I can kind of, I can strip it back to just being me, or I can build a team if it's a big project and kind of make sure that those specialists that I'm working with are really the best people for the job. So,
when you're spending money on those large brands, you've probably got like 50% of that cost is in overheads and the other 50% is in delivery for you as a client. Whereas for you, it might be like 10%. You're getting much more focused time out of that relationship.
Yeah.
What, if any, technology are you using to help you remain at a competitive advantage?
The Adobe programs have always been kind of, my right arm. And I think that as they bring out new tools, it's really helping designers. I think there's also a sort of debate going on at the moment about how AI is kind of being brought into those programs as well.
We got to the buzzword right at the end.
Yeah.
We got to an hour and 4 and we've only just mentioned AI.
You set me up for it.
We've got a new record.
I think, how like generative fill's being brought into Adobe, and there's this kind of debate about how accessible that's then making design and design programs, and kind of, the slightly more Luddite people would be like, it shouldn't be there, let designers do their craft. And I think I'm more on the side of, if it saves a designer time, then it's a good tool that we should kind of embrace and, let it work to your advantage. So I think I haven't spent tons of time experimenting with AI programs yet, apart from the kind of the usual, dabbled with ChatGPT and kind of the generative fill and that side of things. But I'm really interested just to see how all of that sort of develops. But yeah, Adobe overall is kind of the main focus of my technological uses, I'd say.
Do you think things like, just to touch on the point you made there about that sort of like, I think what you're trying to say is that lower end design will almost like fall away and you'll get these more sort of focused specialists who like that's their absolute bread and butter.
Yeah.
So generative fill probably like backfill the sort of like the lower tier designers, and then that super polished stuff will continue to be done by someone who's got a very skilled hand.
Yeah, and I think as well, though, it just means that it shouldn't do those, the people who, that's their bread and butter. I hate to keep saying the word pivot, but like it's about pivoting the skill set so that you're then using that why not use generative fill? Save yourself some time, because it's only as good as the art direction that you're giving it. So kind of taking that, saving time, and then, advancing your skill set into something that AI doesn't do, and kind of making sure that you're kind of one step ahead as much as you can be. I've
used a bit of Bing image generator.
Oh yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I've used, what's the other one called? Midjourney. Yeah. Yeah, I've been using that.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit more convoluted to use. I like the Bing one because it's like you can just go in web prompt and tell it what you want. Whereas Midjourney, because I've been playing around with like feeding Midjourney images to base like prompts off.
Yeah.
But I actually think that
feature.
It's really cool. And I think the one thing that people are going to have to get better with is becoming like a bit of a prompt engineer.
Yeah. Well, that is a job now.
Yeah, it is. Legitimately.
A very well-paid job.
Yeah. I saw actually, I think it was a Mickey say, but OpenAI are advertising like a last resort role. Mm-hmm. It's like someone that like pull the power cable out of the figurative servers if they start taking over. Once it becomes self-aware, press the off button.
That's not a bad shout.
So what does the future hold for Studio Griggs, and where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Just growth, steady growth. And by that, I mean kind of work with the brands that I work with and the projects that I work on. Kind of ideally, I'd love to have sort of a few projects running in tandem that are kind of quite different. So kind of more varied, and just cracking on with some amazing projects. I think that's what I'm going to be focusing on for the next few years.
Awesome. So we have a question from our last guest, Dan Holtom, who is an MD of a digital marketing agency. He's obsessed with how you take the traditional side of marketing, creativity and storytelling and use them in the modern world. So his question to you is twofold. What do you think the timeless principles of marketing, creativity and storytelling are, to some degree, neglected now? And the follow-up to that is, and what are the things that will define you in the market, you with the studio?
Okay, yeah. The timeless principles of marketing, creativity and storytelling, it just goes back to emotion. Kind of everything creates emotion. And I think those three things can be really interlinked, because it's how you're making someone feel. And I think once you sort of forget that, then you're in trouble. So just kind of remembering that, a brand that's really good at that is Nike. They've always got emotion at the center of their everything that they do. And I think that that's kind of helped them breed success. And I think there's some danger of that kind of being forgotten a little bit with how many touch points let's say a campaign, or whether it's marketing, creative, has to have just from the digital side of things now. I think there is a little danger of that being lost. So kind of just going back to the emotion and making sure that your sort of brand values and how you want people to feel is at the core of everything that you do, so that's kind of the North Star that you go back to. And I think how that sort of relates to what I'm doing with, or that I want to do with Studio Griggs, is kind of having that at the center of everything that I'm sort of providing for a brand, so that if a solution is a commercial solution, it's still got that at the center of it. And if it's a creative solution, it's always grounded in brand strategy and a brand voice, and kind of, really holding that at the center.
Brilliant. So your turn to ask the next person a question.
All right, yeah.